In the autumn of 1944, the war in Western Europe reached a turning point. One Allied army bled itself wide in the Netherlands. Another tore through France faster than anyone believed possible. And in London, Winston Churchill was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about leadership, ego, and the cost of delay. What Churchill said next was never meant for public ears.
On September 17, 1944, Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery launched Operation Market Garden, the most ambitious airborne operation in history. Its goal was bold: seize a chain of bridges in the Netherlands, leap the Rhine, and end the war by Christmas. Montgomery promised speed, precision, minimal resistance. But the plan rested on assumptions about German weakness, Allied timing, and intelligence that contradicted his expectations. British intelligence warned of 2 SS Panzer divisions near Arnhem. The reports were acknowledged, then dismissed. Within days, British airborne units were surrounded. Supplies failed to arrive, relief columns stalled. What was meant to be a lightning strike became a grinding attrition battle. By the time the operation collapsed, over 10,000 Allied casualties had been sustained, many of them elite British and Polish airborne troops. The bridge too far was no metaphor, it was real.
While British forces fought for survival near Arnhem, General George S. Patton was doing something very different: advancing. In August and September 1944, Patton's Third Army broke out of Normandy and surged eastward. In just weeks, it captured over a dozen major cities across France: Le Mans, Chartres, Orléans, Troyes, Verdun. Patton did not wait for perfect conditions. He exploited chaos, studied German retreat patterns, and attacked relentlessly. His greatest obstacle was not the enemy, but fuel restrictions imposed by Allied command. Even then, German forces struggled to regroup against his tempo. By early September, Patton was within striking distance of Germany's western defenses, yet he was ordered to halt. History would later ask, what might have happened if momentum, not caution, had been rewarded?
From London, Winston Churchill followed both operations closely. He admired Montgomery's discipline, but questioned his rigidity. He respected Patton's aggression, but feared its political consequences. As casualty reports from Arnhem mounted, Churchill asked hard questions behind closed doors. Why intelligence had been ignored? Why objectives slipped week after week, from Sicily to Caen to Falaise and now Arnhem? Montgomery had promised decisive results. Instead, the war dragged on. Churchill did not remove Montgomery, but in private his patience thinned. What he said next, recorded later in memoirs and wartime correspondence, reveals how even Britain's greatest wartime leader wrestled with the cost of command.
To understand why Churchill's confidence in Montgomery quietly eroded, one must return to June 1944, to the city of Caen. Caen was a D-Day first-day objective assigned to British and Canadian forces. Its capture was meant to anchor the eastern flank of the invasion and prevent German counterattacks. But Caen did not fall on June 6th. It did not fall on June 7. It fell 43 days later. Montgomery chose deliberate set-piece battles, relying on massive artillery and air power rather than maneuver. The result was grinding combat, devastated terrain, and tens of thousands of Allied casualties. German forces, badly outnumbered, were not destroyed. They withdrew in good order. In London, Churchill read the daily reports carefully. Caen was not a disaster, but it was a warning.
By August 1944, the German army in Normandy was collapsing. The moment demanded speed. At Falaise, American forces under Bradley and Patton surged north. Canadian and Polish units pushed south. Between them lay the chance to annihilate Army Group B.
Patton's spearheads came within 15 miles of sealing the gap. He requested permission to close it. The order never came. Caution prevailed. The pocket narrowed, but never fully closed. Tens of thousands of German soldiers escaped eastward, abandoning equipment but saving manpower. Those same units would later stiffen defenses in the Netherlands and along the Siegfried Line. Churchill understood what this meant. Wars were not won by pushing the enemy back. They were won by destroying his ability to fight.
By late summer 1944, Allied command faced a quiet but serious dilemma. Montgomery planned meticulously. He demanded overwhelming force. He avoided risk. Patton did the opposite. He studied military history obsessively, Hannibal, Napoleon, the German blitzkrieg itself. He anticipated enemy reactions and moved before they could. Montgomery believed battles should be prepared until success was certain. Patton believed certainty only came from action. Neither approach was reckless, neither was flawless, but only one produced continuous momentum. Churchill, ever the strategist, saw the difference clearly, even if politics prevented him from acting on it.
Churchill's problem was not military alone, it was political. Montgomery was Britain's most famous general. Removing him would shatter morale at home and strain the Anglo-American alliance. Patton, despite his success, was controversial. His blunt speech, disciplinary incidents, and disregard for diplomacy made him dangerous in peacetime politics. Supreme Commander Eisenhower chose balance over confrontation. Bradley chose caution over speed. And Churchill? Churchill chose patience. But patience has a cost. By September 1944, as bodies were pulled from the fields near Arnhem, that cost could no longer be ignored. And this time, Churchill spoke.
When the last British airborne survivors were evacuated from Arnhem in late September 1944, the scale of the failure became impossible to obscure. Over 10,000 Allied casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. Entire battalions erased from the order of battle. Montgomery publicly framed the operation as 90% successful. Privately, Allied commanders disagreed. The Rhine remained uncrossed. The war continued into winter. German units that should have been destroyed regrouped behind prepared defenses. What had been intended as a war-ending thrust instead extended the conflict by months. Churchill did not contradict Montgomery in public, but in memoranda and private correspondence, his language hardened. This was no longer about personality. It was about judgment.
After Market Garden, intelligence reports were reviewed line by line. The warnings had been there. Ultra intercepts, Dutch resistance reports, aerial reconnaissance showing armored movement near Arnhem. The presence of ISS Panzer Corps was not speculation, it was documented. The failure was not intelligence, it was interpretation. Montgomery had designed a plan that depended on speed and weak opposition. Information that contradicted that vision was discounted. Churchill, a lifelong student of intelligence, understood the danger of believing what one wished to be true. Wars, he knew, punish assumptions mercilessly. By October 1944, the strategic consequences were clear. The failure to cross the Rhine meant Germany retained its western shield. The Battle of the Bulge, launched in December, would be fought with troops that might never have escaped Normandy or the Netherlands. Patton, when the counteroffensive came, reacted instantly, turning his army 90 degrees in days. Montgomery, placed in temporary command of northern forces, advanced cautiously once again. Churchill watched the pattern repeat. Opportunities were met with hesitation. Breakthroughs were managed rather than exploited.
Victory was inevitable, but slower than it needed to be. And slower meant more graves.
Churchill did not explode. He rarely did. Instead, he wrote. In private letters and post-war reflections, Churchill acknowledged Montgomery's organizational strengths, but questioned his battlefield instincts. He noted delays, missed opportunities, and over-reliance on preparation at the expense of initiative. About Patton, Churchill was more conflicted, admiring his energy while fearing his unpredictability. Yet when forced to choose between caution and momentum, Churchill's own record was clear. He had never won wars by waiting.
By early 1945, with Germany collapsing from both east and west, the outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. But Churchill was already thinking ahead to history. Who would be remembered as bold? Who would be remembered as careful? And who would be remembered as costly? The question was no longer whether Montgomery had failed. It was whether failure had been allowed to repeat itself. And in that reckoning, Churchill's verdict, spoken quietly, recorded later, would be devastating in its simplicity.
Winston Churchill never issued a dramatic public rebuke of Bernard Montgomery. That was not his way. But in private reflections and post-war assessments, his judgment was unmistakable. Speaking of commanders who mistook caution for strategy, Churchill remarked that boldness, rightly timed, saves both blood and effort, while excessive prudence only prolongs the agony. It was not a quotation aimed at a single man, but those who knew the context understood its meaning. Montgomery had planned carefully. He had preserved his army, but he had failed, repeatedly, to convert opportunity into decisive destruction of the enemy. Churchill believed wars were won by striking when the enemy staggered, not when conditions were perfect, but when they were fleeting. And fleeting moments, once lost, never return.
If Churchill saw the problem so clearly, why did Montgomery remain in command? The answer lay beyond tactics. Montgomery symbolized British resistance, El Alamein, North Africa, survival. Removing him would fracture public confidence and strain Allied unity. Churchill understood that wars are fought not only on battlefields, but in newspapers, parliaments, and Allied capitals. So Montgomery stayed. Not because he was flawless, but because the cost of removal, Churchill believed, might exceed the cost of delay. It was a decision made not by a general, but by a statesman. And like many such decisions, it carried a heavy human price.
When the war ended in May 1945, victory belonged to all. But history does not distribute credit evenly. Montgomery is remembered as disciplined, methodical, and cautious, sometimes wisely so, often excessively. Patton is remembered as aggressive, relentless, and flawed, dangerous in peace, decisive in war. Churchill, standing apart from both, is remembered for understanding the difference. He knew that armies win battles, generals win campaigns, but it is judgment under pressure, that decides how many must die before victory arrives. And that, more than any single battle, was the lesson of 1944.